Hi there and welcome to the Air Equipment YouTube channel. This is part 4 of our discussion of life safety dampers. Fire dampers have to go through some very rigorous testing in order to get the UL label. First, the damper has to be exposed to flame, and if it's a 1.5 hour rated damper, it's tested at 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's a 3-hour rated damper, then the temperature is 1900 degrees. Then, after being exposed to the heat for either 1.5 or 3 hours, the damper is exposed to a fire hose test. They spray cold water on it to simulate what might happen in the case of a real fire when the fire department comes to try to put out the fire and start spraying water in the building. Dampers also have to have if they're dynamic, they need to have a closure test to make sure they fully close under force of air pressure, air velocity, and temperature. And then all actuator-driven dampers need to be cycle tested. And also, they use a salt spray. They actually, as they're cycle testing the dampers, they spray a solution of salt and gunk on it to simulate what might happen to a damper that's been mounted in the wall for many years, that it's not perfectly clean as it would be coming from the factory, has a lot of gunk and dust and dirt on it, and it still has to close even with all that material on it. At the UL testing facility, they have a big brick wall where they install various dampers to test them, and on one side of the wall they have a very big gas burner arrangement to really heat up those dampers. As you can see here in this photograph, it's a very sizable damper, and just peeking through on the edges, you can see the bright orange color. That's the flame on the other side. This big gas burners are shooting flames onto this steel damper to heat it up to either the 1700 or 1900 degree temperature. And the inspector there is checking it out. It's probably pretty warm where he's standing right about now. Then, after the damper has been heated up for the 1.5 or 3 hours, they spray the fire hose on it. And I have never experienced this in person. I'd like to see it one of these days. But I'm told that when they hit those red hot steel blades of the dampers with a cold stream of water, that the noise is just deafening. Much of the water instantly turns to steam. The metal blades suddenly contract and start rattling and shaking, and it is just the loudest thing you've ever heard. And after the test, after the water's been sprayed on it, the dampers are very carefully inspected to make sure that the blades are still in place. And if, after all the heat and after the cold water, if a blade gets out of place, if it falls, if there's too big of a gap, then that damper fails the test. Then UL tells the manufacturer, I'm sorry, but your damper did not pass the test. Dampers that are also rated for horizontal installations, such as on a floor, also are tested in the same way. This photograph here shows the very end of the test after the heat's been applied and then the cold water sprayed on it, and now all the steam is rising from it. But the same thing applies. The damper has to close fully, has to stay in place, and after all this, the blades have to be where they belong, with very little, if any, gaps allowed. For ceiling radiation dampers, a similar test is conducted. Here's a photograph of a ceiling damper installed in a sheetrock ceiling, and this is in a test facility also. Here's another photo taken from a little farther away. You can see that damper is up in the ceiling, and this entire room has been installed with sheetrock and the joint compound to imitate exactly what it would be like in a sheetrock ceiling in a building. And then they turn on the gas jets and they basically just burn the whole thing down as best they can. And as you can see in this photo, approximately 1 hour later, that ceiling radiation damper is still in place and the blades are closed, so it passed the test. And as you can tell from some of these photographs from actual testing, that those dampers have to go through some really tough testing to make sure they pass the test and are allowed to bear the UL 555 or 555S or 555C label. But any damper that does pass the test, you can be very, very confident that it will do its job if, God forbid, there's ever a fire in the building.